Hello, my name is Alex Badges, and I'm the staff quantitative ecologist for MASERC, the Minnesota Aquatic Invasive Species Research Center at the University of Minnesota, and also the lead developer of this app, PI Charter. PI Charter is our online dashboard and submissions portal for Point Intercept, or PI, aquatic plant survey data, hence the PI and PI Charter. Our mission is to build a comprehensive statewide database for these data, like those being built in Wisconsin, Michigan, and elsewhere, to inform management, guide decision making, and facilitate a better overall understanding of the health and diversity of our inland lake communities. When you arrive at PI Charter, you will find that there are 4 tabs you can currently visit. You will land on the Overview tab, which is this one specifically, but this video tutorial will instead be covering the Submissions and Leaderboards tabs. I cover the other tabs in separate videos. Here on the Submissions tab, you can upload PI survey records to our database that we don't already have. To do this, you will answer a series of questions indicated by these numbers here. Behind the scenes, the app will use your answers to those questions to clean and reshape your data to make them ready to join up with the others in our database. As you can maybe imagine, no 2 PI survey data sheets are exactly the same looking for many good and complicated reasons, just as no 2 surveyors are exactly the same person. We recognize that. However, it does make gluing submissions from different people to each other into one glorious database file a little bit tricky. In the past, when MASERC took submissions of these files, a person had to manually reshape and clean those files. It would often take hours to do this in a way that didn't introduce errors. What PI Charter does is use the amazing power of the R programming language to automate that process so that it is fast and error-free. All it needs from you as the submitter is some guidance on what data to put where and what reshaping might be appropriate for your particular data submission. So in this tutorial, I will walk you through all the questions this tab will ask you so that you will be aware of the types of info you'll need at your fingertips when you go to make a submission. First, though, you can see that there are, at time of recording, 19 questions that the app might ask you. That probably seems like a lot, and I guess it sort of is. But you will quickly find out that many of these questions are super fast to answer. And there is also some branching logic in here in the sense that the app will automatically skip some of these questions if they aren't relevant to you in your particular case. So you probably won't actually even see 19 questions, and a lot of those questions will be really fast. The intention is that a submission should take 5 minutes or less to complete, assuming that you are familiar with the questions the app is going to ask you and what you're going to need to know for each submission to be able to answer those questions. So without further ado, let's start working our way through the questions on this tab. Now, in some ways, this first question that we're looking at here is one of the most involved in the whole 4. It relates to this distinction between what we call absences and non-throws. During a PI survey, sometimes you throw a rake at a spot and you just don't find any plants there when you do that. We'd call that an absence. Other times, however, you go to a spot planning to throw a rake and you never end up actually doing that. Maybe the spot was too shallow for you to get your boat into. We'd instead call that a non-throw. Now, sometimes people will leave both of those types of things in their data set. So in both cases, you would have a row in your data set in which no plants were found. So these rows might look very similar. However, for us, they're very different. And that's because they arose for very different reasons. In one case, there are no plants there. In the other case, we're not sure if there are no plants there or not because we never checked, right? So long story short, when plants are absent, the first case, we want those entries. However, when we don't know if plants were absent or not because no rake was actually ever thrown or pulled at that site, that's the second case, we would call those non-throws, and we don't want those. So this first question asks you if you understand this distinction between absences and non-throws, and if so, if your data set contains any non-throws or not. Now, if it does, no worries. You have 2 options for how to proceed. You can either go to your file that you're going to be submitting and delete those non-throw entries yourself, in which case the right selection here would be this one, because you're saying your data is not going to contain any non-throws. Or the app actually has some questions later on that can help find and remove non-throw entries, so long as those entries are somehow marked in your data set. For example, maybe you have too deep written in the depth column for all non-throws. In that case, the right choice here would instead be this third one. Okay, I know there's non-throws in here, but I want your help removing them. That's also a viable option. And you'll notice that if I choose either of these two options, the next button becomes active down here. Whereas if I instead try to choose the first or the fourth options, the next button actually locks and there's a little bit of text that pops up. This is actually going to be a common thing that the app is going to be doing here. We need to make sure that you're providing us the types of answers we're expecting. So there's some validation or gatekeeping that happens along the way here. Anyway, make sure to consult this table that's here on this slide for more information on the distinction between absences and non-throws. And if you're finding that distinction confusing, feel free to reach out to me. My contact information is at the bottom of the app here. For now, I'm going to click the third option and move on to the next tab. Now, there's two things I want to point out at this point. First, notice that the colors actually fill in as you complete questions here. These numbers up here do. So you can think of this as actually like a progress bar that shows you how far along into the submission process you are. Secondly, you'll notice that once we're now past that first question, the back button is going to turn on. You can use this back button at any time to return to previous questions if you would like to. Just keep in mind that if you go back to a previous question and change your response, you may then lose some progress ahead of that because some questions depend on previous questions. So you may then have to re-answer later questions because you've changed their inputs. So just keep that in mind. All right, moving on. The next several questions all relate to basic information we need for every submission so that every submission enters our database with some fundamental metadata in it. The first of these questions just asks you for your name as the submitter. This can be either your full name or the full name of the organization that you represent, whichever you'd prefer. There are two reasons we ask for this. First, we want users of the data to be able to see where their data came from within the database, if they intend to use it. That's both for trust in the data and also for attribution, so that everybody gets credit for things, right? Which are both important issues. Second, though, we also want to make sure that folks get credit for having submitted data to PI Charter in the first place. And here I will actually jump away from the submissions tab for a second to instead go over to the leaderboard tab. On the leaderboard tab, which is one of the least complex in the app, but maybe one of the most important ones too, we have two tables. On the left-hand side table is a list of all the surveyors who have participated in at least one survey contained within our database, ranked by the number of surveys they participated in. On the right-hand side is a table of all the submitters who have sent us survey data over the years. If you or your organization has submitted data to our database in the past, you will appear in this right-hand table. We ask that you use the same formatting in your new submissions for your name as is shown here on the leaderboard tab so that we can combine those data up easily. If you haven't submitted before, though, please format the name you give on the submissions tab exactly how you want it to appear here on this leaderboard tab. Full names are best, and please don't use abbreviations if you can avoid it. So yeah, returning to the submissions tab and the name question, if I, for example, try to type just Alex in here, just my first name, you'll notice that the app does not like that. It locks the next button and says, please give a full name. And that's why. It's expecting full names here. So if you give something that does not look like a full name, the app will not like it. If I instead put in my full name, it will allow me to proceed. The next question is asking for your email. This is only so that we can ask you questions with your submission and won't be used to contact you otherwise. Obviously, this is going to need to look like an actual email address. Otherwise, the app will not let you proceed. So I will just grab my email address here and move on. The next question asks about who the surveyors were on the survey that you're submitting, if you happen to know who they were. If you do, you can put their full names here, each separated by a single comma, exactly how it is formatted right here. If you were unsure who the surveyors were, or if those folks want to remain anonymous, you can put NA in all caps here for each such surveyor. It can be a mix of NAs and names too, if you want. Here again, I encourage you to consult the leaderboard tab. If a surveyor is already on here, please format their name exactly the same way in any new submissions involving them. Otherwise, format names exactly how you want them to appear here on this leaderboard tab. Full names are best here to differentiate people from each other. There are an awful lot of Michaels out there, for example, so last names are useful for that. Back to the submission process, I'll just proceed past this question. The next question asks for the name and the DOW number of the lake that was surveyed. Since there are something like 26,000 lakes in the state with a DOW number, 1 billion of which are called mud lake, it's important that we know exactly which lake we're talking about here. So to find the proper lake, first start typing in a string of letters or numbers here in this first search box. Doing so will then populate this second selector with all the lakes that you might mean based on what you've put in the first search box. So you can pick the right lake here. If you're not totally sure what the DOW number is for your specific lake, we encourage you to consult the Minnesota DNR's Lake Finder search tool, which is linked to here, which will help you search for lakes in the state and get back the proper 8-digit DOW number for your specific lake. I'll go ahead and just pick one of these and move on for now. The next question asks when the survey you're submitting started. You can either enter that date here manually using your keyboard or else use this calendar picker that pops up to select it. Note that a specific format is expected here for dates. Dates are hard for computers, so we have to be really fussy about how we enter them. So we're looking for 2-digit month, 2-digit day, 4-digit year, and in that exact order, please. So I'll go ahead and select a date and you'll see that it comes up in that format. And if you hover over it, it expects a certain format and tells you what that is. The next question asks about depth data, which are often gathered during PI surveys. If your data set has a column for depth, what are the units of that column? You can pick feet or meters here or something else if you want. You can also indicate that there is no depth column, or maybe there's a column for both depth in meters and in feet. So whatever your circumstances might be, there should be an option here that you can select. The next question asks about the rake data in your survey. What is the max value that your rake data could take? Many surveyors use a 0 to 3 scale, so the highest rake score possible for them would be a 3. However, 4s and 5s are also common. If your survey instead just used presence absence, put a 1 for that, 1 meaning present. If you don't know what the max rake score was for the survey, please don't guess. Instead, select unknown here, or you can select something else and explain later in the comment section, whatever works best for you. Okay, we're halfway done at this point, and as you can see, most of those questions should have taken you just a couple of seconds each to answer. From here on out, the rest of the questions relate to the actual data file that you're trying to submit. So appropriately enough, the next question asks you to submit that data file. And here you have some options that are explained here. You can upload this as a CSV file or a TSV file, both of which you can make in Excel. You can also upload it as an Excel file, so long as it is the only sheet in that file. Multiple sheets tend to cause problems when you bring them into R, so I would insist that it has to be a single sheet if it's an Excel file. You can also upload your data as part of a shapefile like you might get from GIS. However, shapefiles are not standalone. They have these companion files that they need to come with them. So you need to zip together all those companion files and the shapefile and submit that whole thing as a zip file if you want to go that route, which is what's explained here. Now, if I try to upload a incompatible file type, like in this case, I'm trying to put in a picture, you will notice that the app yells at you for that. So there is some checking here that happens. If instead, though, you upload a valid file type like this one, what the app will do is automatically load in that data set that you have uploaded and display it for you on the right-hand side of the screen. It will also, the app will do one of its first data integrity checks on that data set. In this case, what it's going to do is check to see if any of the columns in your data set contain text values. If it finds any, it's going to print you a message. It's going to list what columns those are, and it's going to color those columns in purple over here. So we can see that in this particular case, it looks like we have some text in the depth column and the whole rake column. In the depth column, it looks like there are X's here. Maybe for rows that are non-throws is what my assumption is here. For the whole rake column, we actually have to go all the way to the bottom, and then we'll realize that, it looks like there's some summary statistics being calculated in this column. And so the titles for those summary statistics are coming up as text in this column. So this integrity check can indicate potential issues with the data that you're trying to submit, because usually text values are not ones we want, although there are exceptions. In this case, we don't want either of these text values. However, the app will help us solve both of these problems automatically using later questions. So actually, I don't have to take any actions related to this right now. This is more of a heads up for me at this point. So I'll proceed. The next questions in the app asks us to trim down the data if we need to do that. We only want to add the raw PI survey data that you are submitting to our database. We do not want to add any rows containing summary information, notes or comments, blank values, and so on. So these two questions help us do that. This first question asks us, where do the data actually start? In what row is that? Usually this is going to be row 1, so that's what the app will default to. But if you, for example, have several header rows in your data set, it may actually be some other row. So use this table shown here on the right to figure out what row your data actually start at, and then enter that number over here. Based on these first 5 rows being non-throws, I would actually say, maybe the data start at row 6, but since the app is going to help me remove these non-throws a different way later, I'm instead just going to leave this as 1 and proceed at this point. The next question then asks, where do the data end in what row? Often, again, this is going to be just whatever the last row of the data set was, in this case, 182. But we already know that's not the case for this data set, right? There are some summary statistics at the bottom, which we don't want. So we can use this table over here to figure out what row the data actually end in. So I'm looking at these rows and we're still in the summary statistics by 171. So I go back up 1 more row, and this row looks like a normal row to me. So it looks like the last real row in here of raw PI data is row 170. So I'm going to come over to this selector and I'm going to type in 170 or use the arrows to get to 170. And then I'm going to go ahead and hit next. And before I talk about this question, you'll notice that the app has actually already chopped out all the rows that were below 170 based on our answer to the previous question. Here, that's exactly what we wanted. But it may not have been, right? We may have made a mistake. If you ever notice that the app did something like this that you didn't think it should have done, remember that you can always hit the back button to go back and choose a different value to previous answers in case you think that might be why it did that. This next question is a little tough to explain. In our database, we have the data in a certain orientation where survey locations are rows and the taxa at those locations are columns. However, some folks arrange their data the other way. Taxa are in rows and locations are in columns. If your data are in that latter orientation, we would need to have R flip your table for you. So if that were the case, you'd select this option here, and what R would do is take all your columns and make them into rows, and take all your rows and make them into columns, which is a really, really annoying thing to do by hand, but it's super easy to have R do it. The good news here is we do not need to have it do that because our locations are already in rows and our taxa are already in columns. So I'm going to select instead, don't flip my table, and proceed. All right, the next question here that we are going to be looking at relates to non-throws. I said earlier that the app will help us remove non-throw rows if they exist, so long as they are clearly marked in our data set. In this particular case, we already know that this person put X's in their depth column whenever they had a non-throw. So we can use that information on this question. This question asks, which column are non-throws marked in? So for this one, I'm going to go through the selector and find the depth column. I'm going to pick that one. If instead you got to this question and you don't have any non-throws in your data set, go ahead and select this option, no non-throws, to be able to proceed instead. All right. This next question asks, okay, what values in that column indicate a non-throw? You can see that this dropdown here now contains every unique value that is seen in the column we picked on the previous question. So in this case, the depth column. I could select as many values here as I want. Maybe you say too shallow sometimes and TS other times. Here, just selecting X is all I need to do, though. So I'll do that and I'll proceed. Now, again, you will notice we have dropped some entries here. The app has gone in and thrown out those 11 rows that had an X in the depth column. which in this case is again exactly what we wanted. Now, this next question asks about column names. To make sure we put your data where they belong in our database, we need your column names to match up with those that are used in our database. And to do that, we have on the back end a giant lookup table that is designed to match your column names with what we would want ours to be. You'll notice that that matching has actually already happened in the table here on the right by the time you get to this page. Your column names are still up here along the top, but now the new column names that we're going to be using in our database are now inside the table in the first row. What we are hoping that you will do here is scan across the columns and say, did the app do a good job of substituting in your names for some new names that are logical? In other words, is Lemna trisulca the right choice here for star duckweed? Is Nitella spa good for Nitella spa? That kind of thing. If everything looks good, you can just say that by selecting this option over here in the selector. However, if not, I would like you to select, no, there are some issues here. And you'll note that if any of your column names are unrecognized, the app will be highlighting them in red, listing them here, and marking them as delete. I want you to especially pay attention to those columns. If any of those are columns you think we should want to be keeping in our database, you'll need to let us know that by indicating that there are some issues with the renaming process. Here, for example, it's actually trying to delete our depth column, probably because it doesn't recognize this exact formulation of depth with the parentheses in here. So that's not good, right? So I'm going to indicate that there are issues here, and that will bring up this next question, which gives me a comments box that I can then use to list all the issues that I noticed. So I might say, don't delete the depth column, star duckweed is actually something, 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 whatever it is that you might need to tell us. I should also note that if there are any columns the app marked as ambiguous, meaning it thinks it could be many different things, those will also be highlighted here, and we'll hope that you'll tell us about those as well. All right, we're very nearly done. The last two questions relate to location data. We'd ideally love to know where exactly in the lakes these survey data were collected from. So if your data set contains lat longs or UTM location data for every location that was surveyed, you can indicate on that on this this selector over here. So these data, for example, contain lat long, so I'd pick this option. If you don't have lat long data, or you don't want to share them or can't share them, there's a selection for that also. However, sometimes we know those data do exist, but they're in a separate file. If that describes your situation, you will pick this option, and that will open up question 18, which then gives you a place to upload that second file that has those location data in it. You can upload all the same kinds of files you could earlier, including shape files, if they are zipped up with all their companion files. I'm not going to actually do that right now. I'm going to back up, pick the right option, and move forward. And doing so, you will notice it skips question 18 for me because it knows it isn't relevant. The last question is just one last opportunity to tell us anything more you think we should know about your submission, or to give us feedback on the process, which we love, by the way. Please use this if you have anything at all to tell us that you haven't already told us. Otherwise, you will notice that the next button now says submit. Whenever you are ready, you can hit this button and the submission process will begin. The app will upload your answers and your data sheets up to the cloud where we can catch them, and a pop-up in the bottom right of the screen will tell you that that process has started. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the button, and you will see that pop-up appear down here. When that pop-up, that submission process is finished, which should only be about 5 to 10 seconds or less, a different pop-up will now appear in the bottom right saying that the submission process is complete, and two new buttons will now appear on screen. The first of these buttons is a download button that lets you download the cleaned up CSV file that the app has made of your submission in case you are curious and want to look at it or keep it for reference. The other button, though, is a reset button, which will take this tab all the way back to question 2. It'll skip question 1 for you and clear out just some, but not all of your previous answers. That way you get sort of a head start on your next submission if you have multiples of that. So I clicked that button. You can see that that's exactly what happened. and my name's still in there. So that should help make multiple submissions a bit faster for you. Now, at this point, I should stress that I showed you many, but not all of the special circumstances you may encounter when submitting a survey file. Every file is different, and you may encounter different quirks than I've shown you here. Just read each question carefully and don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. That said, there are a couple of other things I should point out before I wrap up this tutorial. If you enter this instructions menu at any time, you will find in the usage notes a link to this video so that you can reference it again at any time. Maybe that'll clear up some issues for you. You will also see a couple of other warnings in here. For example, note that there is no way to have the app save your progress so that you can continue a submission later on. Please plan to finish each submission in one sitting. Hopefully that won't be too hard for you to do. Second, note that you can merge cells in Excel. That is not a feature that translates over to R very well. So make sure you eliminate any merged cells in your Excel files before trying to submit them, or you'll likely encounter errors. Third, note that the app does not let you edit individual cells of your submitted file while you are working. So if you spot any errors in your file, you're going to need to fix them manually in Excel or whatever, and then begin the submission process over again. Sorry, but it is actually honestly easier to do it that way than it could ever be in the app. That is not a strength of rShiny. Lastly, note that there will often be a delay between a new submission being completed and that survey entering our database. A MASERC staff member needs to check it over and approve it before that submission can enter the database. So it may take a little bit of time. However, if it's been greater than 2 weeks, feel free to email us for an update. Oh, and if you aren't sure if what you have is actually a PI survey or not, if you head over to the Overview tab and you look in this Start Here menu, there is this drop down here. How are PI surveys different from all other kinds? There's a guide here that will help you recognize a PI survey file from other types of survey files when you see it. Okay, with that concludes this tutorial for using the Submissions and Leaderboards tabs of PI Charter. We appreciate your interest in PI Charter and in this tool, and we especially appreciate your interest in submitting your data to our database. This resource wouldn't exist without your cooperation. If you have any additional questions, feature requests, or bug reports, please feel free to contact me. My contact information can be found at the bottom of the app. Thank you.